Hi, class. Welcome back. So I believe this is part three of our conversations and lecture on IP addresses, knowing the host portion of the IP address. We've talked about that already. Knowing the host portion, knowing the network portion, basically how many IP addresses, right, can you um, create or find in a network, right? And within those IP addresses, how many hosts, right? How many hosts? So you have a whole range of IP addresses. Well, how many of those IP addresses are useful hosts? That is, how many IP addresses can you assign to host? When we say host again, remember, that's the devices in the network. So computers, might be tablets, um, it might be switches, whatever devices used by the end users, right? You assign IP addresses to those. So we've talked about looking at the whole range of IP, looking at an IP address, for example, and trying to determine using the subnet mask, right? Using the subnet mask, what portion of that IP address is the network and what portion is assigned to host, and how many hosts can you derive or determine out of that IP address range based on the subnet mask. So in this lecture discussion, we're going to go a step further and look at how we subnet. So basically, um, when you talk about subnet, you're talking about breaking up a network into smaller bits. Easier to manage, easier for security, easier for things like if you have a department, you have a location, you want everything to be segmented. In some cases, if your network was to go down, right, then if you have subnets, then not the entire network goes down. Maybe a subnet can be down temporarily, but all the other subnets in your whole network will still be active. So it's good for management of a large network or, yeah. So that's the purpose, main purpose of a network is of a subnet is like small networks within a big network, sub networks, smaller networks within a larger network. So we want to look at how we basically, use an IP address slash subnet mask to create subnets. There is a few techniques for that. And so let's dive into that. Right now, I'm going to share my screen. All right. So I have a few sort of standard examples I have here. So in sheet one, I have various IP address slash subnet mask. We're just going to grab one of them here and use that in our example. So this is a 11.1, 11.32.32.50/28. Um, so let's look at something else before we dive into this and we, put in the IP address and put in the subnet mask. Let me show you another chart I have here. So this chart I have here basically gives you a picture of um, your subnet mask and sort of a standard determination of how many IP addresses you can get from from a subnet mask, how many subnets, right? So it's a kind of a standard default sort of layout here, right? So um, so we've worked with /24. We might have worked with other subnet masks, but we work with you might have done examples with /24, 25, 26. But just to be more clear here, what we see is we see, 1 second there. Just want to be sure that I'm actually recording, because sometimes uh, you spend quite a lot of time and you find out you weren't actually recording for some reason. So you got to be sure you're recording if you're going to publish the video. All right, so it looks like I'm recording and we're good. So let's keep going. So like this is sort of a default template. Now you look at the first column C here, and here you have /24, which is basically 255 slash 255.255.255.0. That gives you /24 because there are 24 network bits, right? 24 network bits. Just to refresh your mind on that idea, if we go back here, go back here, you can see, where is it? This one here. All right. So if I put in this IP address, 11.32.32.50.50, so the /28 tells us how many bits we can use for the network. So we're going to put, this is going to be 255.255 dot 255. Now you notice that .28 /28 is going to extend. So if I was to put my ones here, and I'm going to just shade that so you see what's going on. I'm just going to put a shade. Let's make it a thick shade. Now if I just drag that across, so the first 255, 8 bits, that gives you 8 bits right there. If we keep dragging that, that's 16 bits. If we keep going, that is now 24 bits. But now this the subnet mask is /28, right? So we're going to actually go into the host section. That's how you do that. So we have 24 so far. We obviously need 4 more, right, to get /28. So I'm just going to drag this way, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we have a /28. So basically you have 28 bits for your network. All right. When it was /24, let me just use this again. This is 24, which is kind of like a standard network. So you have 24 bits for the network portion, and you have 8 bits for the host portion. As you know, 8 bits is going to take you all the way to 256 addresses. All right. All right, so again, this is 20/28. So we gotta sort of grab 4 over here, and now we have. So if you do the math, you're gonna see that this is 240, right? So 255.255.255.240 is your subnet mask, which gives you /28. How do we get 240? Well, you can see that 240, you can put a 1 here, right? 128 leaves you with some change. Well, just to be clear, just to help you remember again, you go 240, right? Minus 128 equals to 112. So you have 1. Then you have 112 left. You take out 64. So you have 164. 64 goes in there. That's another 1 here. Right here, that's 1. So this goes. You have 44 left there. So you can put 32 out of 44, and then you take 32 out of that, and you have 16. So 16, and then zeros all the way. All right. So that's how so going back to this chart here, so we have our subnet mask /24, which gives us 256 addresses, right? Now, 256 addresses, 256 is the max you can have in the network. And that creates one subnet, right? Or one network, really. That's like a complete network. So one subnet, one network. So the next, so if you want to break that down, so this is subnetting now. You want to break this down into 2 subnets, which is basically you divide one subnet by 2. Now you realize that obviously if you divide by 2, now you have 2 sets of 128 addresses, right? So two subnets. One of it has 128 addresses, the other has 128 addresses. All right. So you can say the first one is the HR department. If you have such a big HR department needing about 128 devices, and you have another one which might be, I don't know, maybe the sales team, right? And they have another subnetwork. Now, when you look at the subnet mask here, that's a /25. All right. So in terms of now, you don't have to memorize this. You can have a cheat sheet so you can make reference. And looking at it graphically, if I zoom out here, you can see it's pretty small. But the first subnet, and you split that into two, so you have 128, 128. Now, if you split your network into four, now you have four subnets, right? And obviously that's going to be four subnets will be 64 addresses per subnet. And then you can split, your network into eight subnets, which gives you 32 addresses per subnet. So you keep going that way, right? You can go from one network, subnetwork to two networks, or four, 8, 16, 32, and on and on and on. So 64 subnets, right? So if you were to, like totally exhaust, how many subnets you can possibly make, well, you can have if you extend this here, you can definitely have a subnet of 2 addresses. That'll be a pretty small subnet, but, there might be a need for that. And this will be, this should be /31, all right? So you're going to have 2, and then this will give you, say, many subnets, 2 each. So that's going to be right about 128 subnets. All right, 128. If you multiply 128 times 2, it's going to bring you to 256. Right. So the total of your subnets always have to equal 256. Right. That's like a magic number. And well, it wouldn't make sense to have, well, I guess if you needed to, you could also have subnets of 1 address. There might be cases when that needs to happen. So 1 address per subnet, which will take you to about 256. So, there might be a need for that. So this will be 256 addresses, which is basically bringing us back to 1 subnet. But in this case, if you were to break your 256 so that, when you think about it, you have 256 different networks, but you can only have 1 device. Actually, I don't even see how this is going to work, because obviously you're probably thinking to yourself, wait a minute. Out of all the addresses, 2 of it is already taken, all right? So you're going to take the first address is for your network, which is your gateway, the router, and the last one is your broadcast. So you always have to minus 2. So if you minus 2 from 256, you only have 254 useful host addresses. Out of 128, you have 126, and you keep going. So obviously, it looks like 4 addresses or 64 subnets is the most realistic you can have, because in 64 subnets, each subnet will have 4 addresses, and the 4 addresses, 2 are reserved. So you have 2 useful. Now, if you have a subnet of 128 subnets and 2 addresses, well, one of it is the network and one of it is the broadcast. What's going on there, right? So that may not be, maybe in other situations it might work, but yeah, it looks like it wouldn't make any sense based on our conversation. All right. I mean, there's some conversations you might see, or some, tutorials of, when various tutors or online tutors or videos tell you, that can be a possibility. But right now, we're just going to keep it to the default, which is you can have a maximum of 64 subnets in a 256 address network. All right. So, and again, if you look at the graphic that I have here, just a straight division, you can divide equally by 2, by 4, equally, remember I said equally, by 2, by 4, by 8, by 16, by 32, or by 64. All right. So looking at it graphically, this is like a standard set of, should I say, formats here. Now let's go back to our, should I say, actual work here and see how we can determine the actual address numbers, right? So here's our starting point. We have this IP address and we're trying to determine the IP addresses that we can derive out of that. Remember, you're always thinking about what's the in that network or in that, in those subnets, what is the network address going to be? What's the first, the last, and what is the broadcast address going to be? All right. So let's keep going here. All right. So if we're to again do the math here using Excel, this is kind of easy. So, um, so we skipped 128, we skip. So the first number is 11. So we're going to put a 1 here. And we have 3 left. So we skip 4 and we put 1 here, 1 here, 1 here. All right. So you can see using Excel, just look at the bottom right. Look at the bottom right of my Excel window. All I have to do is, just to be sure I'm on the right track, I highlight 8, highlight 2, highlight 1, and that tells me the sum is 11. So I know that matches the first octet. 32, that's easy. I'm just going to put a 1 here, put a 1 here. And for 50, I can start with 32, put a 1. That should leave me with 18. I'm going to put a 1 here. That leaves me with a 2. And I put that over there. To be sure, I'm going to highlight 32, 6. When I click this, I click 32. I hold my control key, just in case you're wondering. Then I click 16. Then I click on 2. And that gives me the total, which is 50. So I know for my last octet, that's 50. All right, coming down to your subnet mask, it's kind of like basically straightforward. So we have all ones here, all ones, all the way to this point here, right? So your subnet mask in long form is 255.255.255.240, and the CIDR is /28, which basically means you have 28 bits for the network, and you have 4 bits for the host. Now, when you think about it, just to drop that right away, if you're thinking of, well, how many hosts are we going to have? Well, you have 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is 2 to the power 4, which is 16, right? So you have 16, literally 16 addresses, not hosts. You have 16 addresses that are useful. All right. So in the whole range, you have 16 addresses. And in terms of, if you go back here, go back to your chart, you see that /28 always gives you 16 addresses. And for the useful addresses, you're going to have what? 14 you can assign to different hosts. All right. So always remember the first and the last are reserved. All right. So we're going to have 16. So basically, just looking at the zeros there, the zeros tell you the 4 zeros. So having a nice chart like this, graphically can be easier for you to visually, determine what's going on there. So yeah, that's 16. So you have a total of 16 hosts for that IP address /subnet mask. All right, let's keep going. So here, when we do our ANDing, again, based on your Excel formula that has been set up, this is pretty good. So that's going to be 11 right there. That doesn't change. This is 32, does not change. This is 32, does not change. And then, so the last octet, we do the math. So this is 32, 16. And if you, again, look at the bottom right here, that is 48. So your IP address there is 11.32.32.48. So that's going to be your network address, right? The first address in the network always belongs to the router or the gateway, how traffic comes in and goes out of the network using that IP address. So that's the first one. And then, so to determine the broadcast address, right? We have to remember how many hosts can we get in this network. We know it's 16 hosts, right? That is, we can only have a, based on the size of the number of hosts here, you can have a max of 16 addresses, basically. So automatically your range goes from 48 to 48 plus 16, all right? Because you can only have 16 based on this on the numbers we have here. You can only have 16 addresses. So it's just a straight math. So 11 32.32, and this is 48 plus 16, right? Again, pull up the calculator. You want to be quite sure. So 48 plus 16, that gives you the broadcast address. Now, of course, remember what we said, you always have to minus 1, okay? And I have it here, so it might be good for you to just always remember that minus 1. So right here, 63 is your 11 dot 32.32.63 is your broadcast address. That is the last address in the network. The first is 11.32.32.48, and the last is this here with dot 63. So if you want to know, all right, in terms of the host, when you start assigning different IPs to different computers and stuff, the first number you can use is 49, all right? 11.32, 11.32.32.49, that's your first. And the very last is the number that comes before your broadcast. So again, 11.32.32. What? Give me the number. Yep. If you said 62, you are absolutely right. All right. So this is going to work. It doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter what the subnet mask is. Again, going back to this chart, if your subnet mask is 24, then you know that's only one subnet I can get. If it's 25, you can get two. If it's 26, you can. This is default. If it's slash 26, that's 64 addresses, and that is four subnets, right? When you go down this chart. So again, you might have a chart like this to help you out. If it's slash 27, you can have 32 addresses per subnet. That's 8 subnets. If it's 28 slash 28, you can have 16 addresses per subnet, which is going to be 16 total subnets. If it's slash 29, you can have 8 addresses for for all 32 subnets. And finally, if it's slash 30, that tells you, well, we have 64 subnets, and each of the subnets allows 4 addresses maximum, which tells you you can only have 2 functional hosts in that network. All right, so let's move on a step further here and do actual subnetting. All right, so here's our last address here. Now, to get to, let me just kind of bring this down here by 1. Cancel, well, that doesn't like that. So I'm just going to drag this down here and maybe take up the top. I don't need the top. So something like this. We take that out just so there's no confusion. Then I need a border at the top. All right. So here's our network, right? The network starts with this number here, this IP address, and ends with this IP address. So now if we're going to break this network down into subnets, right? Want to break it down to subnets. Now we know, based on the subnet mask that we're going to have a maximum of 16 subnets. Again, going back to your chart, you have it right here. You have 16. So what do? We go back here and um, the first subnet is just going to follow the last one you have here in your broadcast. All right, so we're going to go here. This is going to be 11, 32, 32, and the very next number, right? I guess it's safe to say as long as you're not exceeding 256, right? If it was 256 or 255 technically, then you will have to go back to one. But you might see what I mean. Um, all right, so we go 64 here. That's the first one. So if you bring this down, you're going to put this here, and you're going to say, 1 second, 1 second here. All right, so you're going to say that in your first subnet, right? Let's make that bold. Your first subnet out of the 16, the network address in that subnet, in that network, right? The network address is 11.32.32.64. All right. Then again, remember, you only have 16 addresses per subnet. So to know the last the broadcast address, they just do the math basically. 64 plus 16, 80. And remember, you got to take out 1. So that's going to be 79. So 11, 32, 32, dot 79. So if you are to do the first usable host in that subnet, it's going to be 65. So if you had a bunch of computers, you will assign the first one the IP address 11.32.32.65. And the very last device you can assign an IP, the IP will be 11.32.78. So that's your first subnet. All right. You have a maximum of 16. Remember that? So basically, I can just copy this here if that works. Go down here and say subnet 2. All right. So my second subnet here, well, I guess this is the only thing that's changing. So I can just keep this here and say the network address of subnet 2 is going to be 70, 70, sorry, it's going to be 80, right? It's going to be 80. And again, 80 plus 16, that's easy. That's 96 minus 1, that's 95 here. Okay, that's 95. And then the first usable host is going to be 81. And the last is dot 94. All right, so you start to break down into subnets and assign the various IP addresses. That is the way to go about it. All right, so this is subnet 1 here. The IP address starts, the IP address 11.32.32.64, and the last address there is 11.32.32.79. Within that range, these are the useful IP addresses. Goes from 11.32.32.65 and ends at 11.32.32.78. When you jump to, so let's say you might decide this is the accounting department. If you have such a large accounting department with, well, maybe not so large, right? 16. So you might have, right about 16 devices. You need to, or say, yeah, 14 devices. You need to assign stuff. You can say this is a sales. All right. So you have, a dozen or so staff, and with devices, you can assign folks there. All right. You might have so you keep going, you have a maximum again of you have 16 subnets, right? So you can say this guy's here operations, for example, the operations department, and you take all this out. Your next IP address here is going to be 95, 96. And so 96 over there, clear 96 plus 16. That's 112, and 111 is going to be for the last octet for the broadcast. So the first usable host here is, yep, you guessed it, 97, and here is 111. All right. So if you keep going down here and trying to, complete this job, you're going to have, I need to just, to be clear, that's network 3. So you have network 1, subnet 1, subnet 2, subnet 3. All right. If we zoom out a little bit, you can see what we have here. So here's our actual network. Here's the IP address, 11.32.32.48. It ends at 11.32.32.63. And then you start moving down to the various new subnets. So that's subnet 1, subnet 2, subnet 3. And you can see how we assign the different IP addresses. All right. So an example there, again, just to look at the chart that we have. This, should I say, breakdown of, or let me say this is a sort of a standard template. All right. So standard template, again, you don't have to memorize it. You can have a cheat sheet. And the more you do this, you might not even need to look at your cheat sheet, that frequently. But a combination of your cheat sheets as well as, trying to do some actual calculations, because, it takes a while for you there's so many numbers, binary to decimal and back. What is my subnet start? What's the size of each subnet? How many IP addresses? There's a lot of things that can just make your head spin. But with time, you start getting a bit more comfortable. All right. So again, this is part 3. And if you sort of go through, what we've talked about in the last, about almost 40 minutes now, and practice it on your own, then it makes more sense to you. All right. You can change the IP address. There's a few here in this table, a few different IP combinations. You can just grab any of those, stick those IPs in here, and see if you can determine the correct subnet mask and sorry, you can determine the how many subnets you're going to get and the different addresses of the subnets. Okay, well, that's all we got for now, and I will talk to you guys later.